She was 8 months pregnant when her sister handed her husband the divorce papers. And he signed them, without hesitation, without looking up, without a single word to the woman carrying his child. The silence that followed wasn't the comforting kind. It was the kind that confirms your worst fear. But what nobody in that room knew, not the lawyers, not her sister, not even her, was that signing those papers was never a betrayal. It was a trap. And someone had been planning it for a very long time. Before this goes any further, if you have ever trusted someone with everything and been broken by it, subscribe right now. Because this story doesn't just crack your heart open, it dismantles everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the people who are supposed to be closest to you. And then, piece by piece, choice by choice, it builds something new in the wreckage. Stay until the end. You will not regret it. The city of Caronval was not a place that made headlines. It didn't need to. What happened there stayed there, sealed beneath layers of expensive silence, enforced by men whose names were never spoken above a whisper in polite company. Private agreements, vanished records, debts resolved in ways that left no paper trail and no witnesses. And at the center of all that silence sat one name, Zorhan Vale. Not a man you could describe in ordinary terms. 34 years old, unnervingly composed, controlled not from inner peace but from absolute mastery over every variable around him. He owned shipping routes across 3 continents, held interests in industries that governments officially denied existed, and entered rooms the way pressure shifts before a storm. You didn't notice until it had already settled and rearranged everything. He was also, to the bafflement of everyone who knew him, a husband. His marriage to Sable Orinwi 18 months ago had rattled his entire circle. Not because she was unworthy, she wasn't, but because Zorhan Vael did not make sentimental choices. He did not allow softness in. He did not trade in vulnerability. And yet he had chosen her, with a certainty and completeness that nobody around him could account for. Nobody, except the people who had been watching her long before he had. Because Sable was not simply who she appeared to be. She didn't know that yet. But the wrong people did. And they had been waiting, with the precision of professionals, for exactly the right moment to move. That moment was today. Her name was Sable Orinwi. And on the morning everything collapsed, she was standing barefoot in the East Wing kitchen, one hand pressed to the small of her aching back, the other wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't managed to drink. 8 months pregnant, alone in a house with 42 rooms. She had stopped counting the days since Zorhan last slept in the same bed. She had stopped counting a lot of things, how many dinners she'd eaten in silence, how many times she'd reached for her phone and set it back down, how many times she'd watched his motorcade vanish before sunrise and told herself this was simply how his world worked. She was not fine. She just had no one left to say that to. And then her phone rang. Mira. Her sister's name on the screen used to mean warmth, the one soft thing in a life that had grown sharp on every edge. I'm coming over. Mira's voice was different, tighter, the controlled tone of someone who has rehearsed what they are about to say. There's something you need to know. She didn't think anything of it. That was the cruelest part of betrayal. It never announces itself. It arrives wearing a face you love, speaking in a voice you trust, carrying 28 years of shared history as cover. Mira arrived looking too deliberate, dressed too precisely. She didn't embrace Sable at the door, just touched her arm briefly, like a stranger remembering that warmth is expected of her. Sit down, Mira said. I'm fine standing. Sable shifted her weight. Zorhan needs to sign some papers. The words landed wrong. What papers? Mira set the leather folder on the table. Sable looked down and the room tilted, because those were not business papers. Not anything she had prepared herself for. Not anything she had let herself imagine, even in her lowest moments. Divorce papers. Her name. His name. A line waiting. What is this? The question came out smaller than she meant. It's the right thing. Mira's voice was measured. You know this marriage. Where is he? He's in the study. He already knows. A beat. He's agreed, Sable. The walk to the study was the longest of her life. The house felt different. Colder. Emptier. As if it already knew something she didn't. Zoran was at his desk when she pushed open the door. He glanced up briefly, giving nothing away. His gaze dropped to the folder. She placed it in front of him. Her hand was trembling. She hated that it was trembling. Is this what you want? He looked at the papers, picked up the pen, and without one word, not one, he signed. The sound was unremarkable. It felt like the end of everything. She walked out. Didn't cry in the hallway. Didn't cry in the car her sister had already arranged. Already, as if coordinated long before today. She sat in the back seat, hands folded over her stomach, watching Karanval blur past the window, thinking about the way he hadn't looked at her. Not once. Not when she entered. Not when she set the papers down. Not when she left. She told herself it meant nothing. She was wrong, but not in the way she thought. Because above her, in that same study, Zorhan Vale set down the pen and stared at the door she had just walked through. His jaw tightened. Something fractured across his face. An expression instantly suppressed, gone in less than a second. His right hand, Davin, stepped out from the corner of the room. It's done? Zorhan's voice came out low. Final. Make sure she's protected. Every hour. She doesn't see it. She doesn't know. But nobody gets within 100 meters of her without my knowing. And the sister? Zorhan studied the signed papers on his desk. Something cold and precise settled back into his face. Watch her. A beat. She just made her first mistake. And in the car, moving through Karanval's gray streets, Sable pressed her palm gently against her stomach and had no idea, none at all, that the man she believed had just destroyed her was the only reason she was still breathing. She thought the worst had already happened. It hadn't even started yet. The apartment Mira had arranged was clean, modest, painfully ordinary for a woman who had spent 18 months inside Zorhan Vile's world. No marble floors, no security wing, no silence that cost money to maintain. Just 4 walls, a narrow window overlooking a gray street, and a folded note on the counter in Mira's handwriting. Call me if you need anything. Sable stood in the center of the room and did not call her. She unpacked with mechanical slowness. She had left the house the same way she'd walked out of that study, with nothing she had planned for. Her hands moved on their own, arranging a life into a space that didn't fit it. And the whole time, the baby moved. Small, steady shifts. Reminders that she didn't have the luxury of staying broken. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark replaying everything. Every silence. Every distance she had dismissed. Every moment she had told herself she was imagining things. And the more she replayed it, the more something felt wrong. Not wrong the way grief feels wrong. Wrong the way a story feels wrong when something essential has been removed from its center and nobody told you. Zorhan hadn't looked at her. Not when she walked in. Not when she set the papers down. But his hands. His hands had been too still on that desk. Not tense. Not restless. The stillness of someone holding themselves deliberately in place. She pushed the thought away. That was what people did when they couldn't accept the truth. Searched for things that weren't there. Morning came gray and lightless, and with it, Mira. She arrived without knocking. She had arranged the apartment. Of course she had a key. carrying 2 coffees and wearing an expression of rehearsed concern that Sable could now, in hindsight, identify for exactly what it was. She surveyed the room with the air of someone who has already made peace with a decision, then said, "How are you feeling?" "Like I want to understand what happened." Mira wrapped both hands around her cup. "There's nothing to understand. The marriage wasn't working. I know I was unhappy." Sable held her gaze. "I don't know that he wanted this." Something recalibrated behind Mira's expression. Fast. Barely perceptible. "He signed the papers." "I know what he did. I'm asking why." Mira's face settled into something smooth. "Because it was the right choice. For both of you. For the baby." She reached across and touched Sable's hand, warm, familiar, real enough to sting. "I just want you safe. You know that." Sable looked at her sister's hand over hers. 28 years of that hand. Birthday mornings, school corridors, the night their mother died, every hard thing in between. She said nothing. But something cold had started moving through her chest. Not grief. Not anger. Something more precise than either. Because Mira hadn't asked about the baby. Not once. Not yesterday. Not today. And Mira, who had wept at the pregnancy announcement, who had bought 3 different baby books, who used to send voice notes at midnight about nursery colors. Not once. Sable didn't know yet what that meant, but she felt it, the way danger announces itself before the mind can name it, that the woman across from her was not entirely her sister anymore. And she didn't know how long that had been true. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Sable settled into the apartment with the hollow discipline of someone who hasn't decided to stay, not unpacking fully, keeping one part of herself in reserve, ready to move. She attended prenatal appointments alone. She cooked without appetite. She read without absorbing much. Nobody from Zorhan's household called. She told herself that was expected, that this was what the end of a marriage looked like. A clean severance, a door that doesn't reopen. She almost believed it. On the 8th day, she found the envelope, slipped under the door before dawn, no name on the front. Inside, a single photograph. Surveillance quality, slightly blurred at the edges. She stood in the hallway in her robe and stared at it for a long time. Mira, sitting across a restaurant table from a man Sable didn't recognize, leaning forward, smiling. Not the warm smile Sable knew. Something sharper, more satisfied. And between them on the table, a leather folder. The same kind Mira had carried into her kitchen 8 days ago. Sable sat down on the hallway floor, not dramatically. Her legs simply stopped cooperating. She held the photograph and looked at her sister's face and thought, in the horrible stillness of early morning, "Who are you?" Not an accusation, a real and terrifying question. One she wasn't sure she could survive the answer to. She was still sitting there when her phone rang. "Unknown number." She answered. "Don't react." Male. Low. Unfamiliar. "Don't go near the window." Her spine went rigid. "Who is this?" "Someone making sure you stay alive long enough to understand what's happening." A beat of silence. "The photograph came from us. We needed you asking questions." "Who is us?" "People who work for your husband." Everything shifted. "Zorhan is not your enemy. He never was." Firm. Final. "Listen. You don't have long." She listened. 4 minutes. That was all it took to dismantle 8 days of grief and reconstruct it into something far more dangerous. Mira had not come out of concern. She had been placed by people who needed Sable outside Zorhan's protection at the exact moment she was most physically exposed. The divorce papers were forged. Not his signature. A practiced copy, close enough to deceive a woman too shattered to look with any scrutiny. Mira had carried them knowing precisely what they were. The man in that study had not been Zorhan. Where is he? Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't bother correcting it. Safe. Working to reach you. But stop opening the door to your sister. The call ended. Sable pressed her back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Everything she had spent 8 days holding together came apart. Not in collapse, but in fury. Clean and focused and absolutely clear. The kind of anger that doesn't reach for comfort. That wants names and answers. That needs to know how deep this goes and how long her sister had been standing in her life wearing a face that wasn't real. She looked at her stomach, at the child inside, oblivious to what world was waiting. Not yet, she said under her breath. To herself. To the part of her that was still considering falling apart. Not yet. She stood, made tea. Her hands shook slightly but didn't stop. She sat at the small table with the photograph in front of her and looked at her sister's face for a long time. Then Mira knocked on the door. Sable didn't move for 3 full seconds. Every instinct said don't open it. She opened it anyway, because something older than instinct, something that had spent 28 years loving this woman, needed to see it with its own eyes. Mira stepped in carrying flowers, pink ones, the kind she used to leave on Sable's pillow on difficult days. I was in the neighborhood. Sit down, Mira. Very flat, very even. Mira stopped. Something shifted behind her eyes, a rapid, almost invisible adjustment. Are you okay? You look... Sit down. She sat. Her gaze dropped briefly to the photograph on the table. Just briefly. Just long enough. That was everything. Sable saw it. Mira knew she saw it. The room went absolutely still. Not the silence of sisters who've run out of words, but the silence of 2 people standing on opposite sides of a line that can never be uncrossed. How long? Sable asked. 1 unguarded second crossed Mira's face, something that almost resembled the sister Sable had grown up with. Almost. Then it sealed over. You don't understand what's involved. How long? Not a question anymore. Mira stood, straightened her jacket with 2 precise movements, looked at Sable with something hovering between pity and coldness. You should rest. For the baby. She moved to the door, stopped at the frame without turning. Don't go looking for things, Sable. Soft, almost kind. You won't like what you find. The door clicked shut. The flowers sat on the table, bright and absurd. Sable looked at them for a moment. Then she picked up her phone. Her hands were rock steady now. She was finished sitting still. She called Davin. She found his number the way desperation sharpens you. An old email from Zorhan's household, a name she recognized, a number she almost didn't dial. Almost. He answered on the first ring. Mrs. Vale? She hadn't been addressed that way in 8 days. It did something unexpected to her chest. Not comfort exactly, but recognition. Like hearing your name pronounced right after a long time of people getting it wrong. The photograph. The call this morning. That was you. Yes. Where is my husband? 3 seconds of silence. She counted. He needs to see you. Tonight. He gave her an address. Industrial, sparse. A location that didn't appear on maps people used casually. Come alone. One of our cars will follow. She arrived at 9. The door opened before she knocked. A woman she'd never met nodded once and led her down a long, dim corridor that smelled of cold concrete. At the far end, a door. Behind it, a table, 2 chairs, a single lamp. And Zorhan, standing at the far wall, his back to her. He turned when he heard her. She studied him, truly, fully, the way she hadn't permitted herself in months. And what she found was nothing like the man she had reconstructed in her mind during 8 days of grief. Not composed. Not unreachable. He looked like someone who had not slept. Like someone carrying an enormous weight, and refusing to set it down. "You're here." Something had been stripped from his voice that she hadn't noticed missing until now. "You didn't sign them." It came out before she planned it, like something she'd been carrying for 8 days finally releasing. He crossed the room, stopped in front of her. Close. His gaze moved over her face with the particular attention of someone confirming that a thing they feared losing is still there. A muscle worked in his jaw. Then he said, "I would never." 2 words. Absolute. She felt them in her sternum like a key finding its lock. His hand came up, unhurried, almost uncertain, and rested against her jaw. She didn't move away. His thumb traced once along her cheekbone, and he held her gaze the way she had needed him to for months. The fact that it was happening now, here, in a bare room that smelled of concrete, made it more real than anything that had passed between them in their beautiful house. "I'm sorry," he said, "that you were alone in this." "Tell me why." Her voice barely carried. "Tell me what's happening." A shadow crossed his face. Not fear exactly. Something heavier. The expression of a man who understands what honesty costs once it's released. "If I tell you," he said, "everything changes." "Everything already changed." She held her ground. "I need to know why." He looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. Deliberate, controlled. And something in him came undone. He pulled out a chair, waited for her to sit, took the seat across from her, and began to speak. With every sentence, the world Sable had believed she was living in dissolved. Irreversibly, completely, like paper held too close to a flame. She still couldn't see how deep the fire went, but she was about to find out. And nothing would ever look the same. What Zorhan told her that night did not arrive gently. It came in pieces. Measured. The way you dismantle something dangerous without letting the fragments scatter. He spoke for a long time. She didn't interrupt. She sat with her hands folded over her stomach and let each sentence settle fully before moving to the next. Because she understood that rushing this would mean missing something she couldn't afford to miss. The short version was this. Sable was not who she had always believed herself to be. Her family name, Orinwi, carried a weight she had never been told about. Her father, who died when she was 4, whom she knew only through photographs and her mother's edited stories, had not been a quiet civil servant from the eastern provinces. He had been the architect of an underground financial network spanning 6 countries, the kind of structure that moved money without questions, without records, without trails. He built it, controlled it, and when he died, he left it, not to partners, not to lieutenants, but encoded, locked, and tied irrevocably to one person, his daughter. Sable sat very still. "I don't know anything about—" "I know." Zorhan's voice was low. "That was intentional. Your mother hid it to protect you. The people who wanted access have been searching for a long time. They needed someone close enough to move you into position." He paused. "They found Mira." The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. "How long has she been working with them?" 3 years. 3 years. Sable ran the arithmetic without meaning to. 3 years ago, Mira had introduced her to Zorhan, arranged the dinner, been visibly, genuinely delighted as things developed, cried at the wedding. She pressed her palm flat against the table because her bearings had started to shift and she needed something solid beneath her. "She introduced us," Sable said. "Yes." "Was any of it?" She stopped, looked at him. Zorhan's answer was immediate. "I married you because I chose to, not because anyone placed you in my path. What happened between us was the one thing they didn't plan for, and it frightened them. A man with my resources standing between you and them." His jaw tightened. "They needed us apart. So they used the one person you would never question." Sable turned the wedding ring between her fingers. She had been doing it since she sat down, absently, without deciding to, as though her hands were working something out that her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She stopped, set the ring on the table between them. "They're already coming," she said. Not a question. "Yes. Starting tonight. You don't return to that apartment. You don't speak to Mira." Something left his voice, replaced by something rawer. "And you don't go through any of this alone. Not anymore." She regarded him for a long moment. At the distance she had spent 18 months misreading as coldness, now understood as the guarded restraint of someone protecting something they cannot afford to lose. "You should have told me," she said. Yes. No defense, no qualification. Simply, yes. "I should have." That admission cost him something. She could see it plainly, and it was worth more than any explanation could have been. She picked up the ring from where she had set it on the table, slid it back onto her finger. No ceremony, no announcement. Just back where it belonged. His eyes tracked the movement. Something shifted in them, the relief of a man who had braced for the worst and watched it not arrive. Outside, a black vehicle sat unseen at the corner. 2 men inside. They had waited 3 years. A little longer was nothing. But their patience was nearly spent. And when it broke, nothing in Caronval would hold still again. They moved her that same night. Not back to the house. Expected was the most dangerous thing to be. Davin took her to a residence Zorhan maintained under a different name on the northern edge of Caronval. 3 floors, a walled garden, walls thick enough to swallow sound, a building that looked unremarkable from the outside and was, inside, fortified in ways that didn't announce themselves. She was not a prisoner. She understood that. But she was also not free. And she knew it. And for 3 days she sat with the weight of that distinction and tried to determine how she felt about it. She arrived at no clean answer. That, she decided, was probably honest. On the 4th morning, Zorhan came. He arrived before she was fully awake. She found him in the kitchen making coffee with focused, almost rigid efficiency. The deliberate occupation of someone who needed something physical to do with his hands. She stood in the doorway long enough to watch him, unheld, unguarded, ordinary, in a way she rarely got to see, and felt something loosen in her chest that she had been holding shut for months. "You stayed," she said. He turned. "I told you. You're not doing this alone." He set a cup in front of her without being asked. Remembered, without prompting, without fanfare, that she had stopped taking sugar 3 months into the pregnancy. That small, unremarked detail undid something in her chest that had been sealed for so long she'd stopped noticing. "I need to ask you something," she said. He sat across from her, waiting. She understood his patience differently now. It had never been coldness. It was the discipline of someone who believes the right moment matters more than the first available one. The last 18 months. She held her cup with both hands. The distance, the midnight arrivals, not being there. She held his gaze without flinching. How much of that was the situation? And how much was you being afraid of something that had nothing to do with the situation? A long, unhurried silence. Not a deflecting one. "Most of it," he said. She hadn't expected that. She had expected something constructed, something that answered without truly answering. Of what? Of what it meant that you were in my life? I have spent a very long time building things that don't require me to be exposed. And then you were there. He stopped. Chose his words as though each one had weight. "I didn't know what to do with that. So I worked. Kept my distance. Told myself it was for your protection and let myself believe that was the full story. But it wasn't. No. You were scared of losing something real." He met her eyes. "Yes." She reached across and covered his hand with hers. He looked down at it, then at her. Something in his face. A last long-held thing gave way, silently, without theater, like a door that had been braced shut from the inside finally allowed to open. "I've been scared since the moment I found out about the baby," she said. "About whether I was enough, whether we were, whether any of it was real." Her voice remained level. She had earned that. "But I would rather be frightened alongside you than untouched somewhere far from you." He turned his hand beneath hers, held it. Neither of them spoke. The walled garden outside sat gray and still. The city moved beyond it, indifferent. And in that kitchen, something that had been breaking apart for months began, without promise, without ceremony, to come back together. Then Davin appeared in the doorway. His expression said everything before his words did. "We have a problem." Zorhan's hand tightened over Sable's, once, brief and deliberate, before he stood. "How bad?" Davin glanced at Sable, then back at Zorhan. "Mira contacted them. She told them where we moved her." The air in the room changed. Zorhan's focus sharpened, not into coldness, not into distance, but into the exact concentration of someone who has shifted from patience to action and knows precisely what to do next. "How long do we have?" "Hours. Possibly less." Zorhan turned to Sable. She braced herself for the instruction to stay behind, to wait somewhere secure while it was handled without her. It didn't come. He regarded her, levelly, as someone who had earned the right to the full picture. "I need you to hear what comes next, not as someone I'm protecting, as someone who is part of this." She straightened. "Then talk." He did. And this time, nothing was held back. They came before dawn. Not with chaos, with precision. 3 vehicles, no headlights, coordinated approach from 2 sides simultaneously. Davin's perimeter cameras caught them 4 minutes out. 4 minutes was enough. Barely. Sable was in the inner room when it happened. A low, concussive thud somewhere below that made the walls shudder once. She was on her feet before she decided to stand. Her hand went to her stomach before she decided to move it. Davin appeared. "Stay close. Move when I move. Do not stop." She moved. The corridor was dim and fast, hand flat against the wall. 1 step, then the next. Davin ahead. The sounds below growing closer, more methodical. Then a door opened and Zorhan stepped through. And for a half second they just looked at each other across the corridor. And she read his face, the way weather is read. Precisely, without needing to be told. Not panic. Never panic. The calibrated gravity of someone who knows exactly where on the scale of dangerous this falls. He reached her in 3 steps. His hand closed around her arm. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She was, surprisingly. "Who are they?" "People who have been searching for you for a long time." His jaw was set. "Led by a man named Corvin Dast. He ran the organization your father's network was built to service. When your father locked him out, locked everything to you, Dast spent 16 years working to find his way back in." He looked at her. "You are the way back in. You and the child." That last word landed with physical weight. He knows about the baby. Mira told him everything. Below, methodical footsteps. Doors opening one by one, getting closer. Zorhan looked at Davin. Something passed between them without words. Then he turned back to Sable. "I need you to trust me for the next 30 minutes. Completely. Can you do that?" She looked at him. At the man who had signed nothing. Who had come back. Whose hand on her arm felt like a promise not yet spoken but already made. "Yes," she said. He nodded once, and the 30 minutes began. They were the longest of Sable Arinwi's life, because sometimes what breaks you open is not the betrayal itself. It is what comes after. What you discover you're made of when the walls are down and the choices are permanent, and there is no version of this that doesn't require everything you have. She was about to find out exactly what she was made of. They escaped through a passage Sable hadn't known existed, a basement that connected to a building 2 streets over. Cold, dark. Her footsteps loud against stone. One hand on the wall, one hand on her stomach. Her mind doing what it does in genuine crisis, going clear and narrow, collapsing to only the things that matter. A garage, 3 vehicles, Davin ahead, Zorhan beside her. The city moved past the car windows. Nobody spoke. Then she said, "Tell me the rest." He turned to face her. "The rest? There's more. Something you've been deciding whether to say since last night. I can feel it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, honest. "Yes." "Tell me." He turned toward her fully in the dim interior. And she understood from the weight of his silence before he spoke, from the particular way he gathered himself, that what came next was what he had been most afraid to say. Not afraid of her reaction, afraid of what it would change. Once said, "Your mother didn't hide your identity only to protect you from the network." He spoke with measured precision. "She hid it because of what it entitles you to. Your father's original charter, the founding document of the entire structure, names his heir explicitly. It grants that heir not just access to the network's finances, but controlling authority over every agreement, every alliance, every debt the network ever brokered." He stopped. Let that settle. 16 years of transactions across 6 countries. The people carrying those debts are not small. They are governments, institutions, powerful organizations that have spent a decade and a half insisting those obligations simply don't exist. Sable absorbed this without moving. "And if I produce the charter, every debt becomes callable. Every alliance is yours to enforce or dissolve. You would hold a kind of influence that has nothing to do with money directly, and everything to do with what people owe, what they fear, and what they have spent 16 years praying you'd never discover." Corvin Dast owes more than anyone alive. He has been running a shadow faction of the network for years, collecting on debts, keeping the proceeds, treating your father's death as an informal inheritance. If you produce that charter through proper legal channels, everything he built on top of your father's structure collapses. His voice remained controlled, but something moved beneath it, something tightly leashed. "Which is why he cannot allow you to hold it freely. If he controls you, the charter becomes accessible through you. And the baby—" He stopped, steadied. "A child born to the named heir in a specific jurisdiction, with specific documentation filed at the right moment, creates a secondary legal claim. He can contest the charter through the child. He needed you isolated and without protection before the birth. That was always his real deadline." Sable pressed both palms against her stomach. The baby shifted, a long, unhurried movement, entirely unbothered, indifferent to the world being assembled around it. "Where is the charter?" she asked. Zorhan reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew a single folded document. Old. The paper softened with age, the creases worn smooth. He held it out. She looked at it before taking it. "You had it. Since shortly after our wedding. Your mother sent it 3 weeks after the ceremony." A shadow passed through his expression, memory moving across a face that rarely shows it. "She said she had taken time to observe what kind of man I was, and that she had seen enough." Something moved through Sable, the full weight of it, arriving in waves. Her mother, who had spent more than 2 decades carrying the heaviest secret their family held. Who had died 3 months before the wedding, 3 months too soon to be there. Who had found a way, even from the very end, to place the weight somewhere safe. Who had looked at this man, made her judgment, and trusted it, without ever telling her daughter. "She never told me," Sable said. "She was protecting you. as she always had. His voice was even, as I have been trying to, imperfectly, in ways that cost you more than they should have, but never from any place other than caring. She took the document from his hands. The paper was warm from resting against his chest. She didn't open it, just held it. Held it the way you hold something that is about to reshape the entire structure of your life, and you need one moment more before the reshaping begins. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Silence, then breathing. Then Mira's voice, barely above a whisper, stripped of every rehearsed layer, just raw and frightened. Sable, please listen. Sable said nothing. They told me they wouldn't hurt you. Just the papers, just access. That if I helped move you out of his protection, they'd leave you alone after. A shaking breath. They lied. Dast isn't stopping at the charter. The baby. He wants the birth registered in a specific jurisdiction, a competing legal claim. He's been planning it since before you were even pregnant. Her voice fractured. I didn't know the baby was part of it. Not until tonight, I swear. Where are you? They have me. I think they're using me to draw you out. Sable, don't. The line went dead. Silence. Sable lowered the phone. She felt three things at the same time: fury, grief, and the particular anguish of having loved someone profoundly and discovering, at the worst possible moment, that you have not stopped, that you cannot simply decide to. They have Mira, she said. I heard. She called to warn me. Yes. That doesn't undo what she did. No, he said. It doesn't. She pressed the charter against her chest, her father's document, her mother's long silence, her inheritance. We are not leaving her with them, she said. No hesitation. No, we are not. This gets worse before it ends. Yes. She nodded. Something settled in her. Not calm, not peace, but the particular resolve that arrives when staying afraid has simply become impossible, when you must become whoever this moment requires. Then let's finish it, she said. She had no idea yet what finishing it would cost. They found Dast's location before midnight, a warehouse on the southern waterfront, 4 vehicles outside, 12 confirmed men within, possibly more. By any reasonable measure, a bad situation heading into a worse one. Sable stood outside their staging point in the pre-dawn dark and breathed cold air and felt, with a clarity she hadn't anticipated, not fear, not recklessness, something precisely between them, something that felt like a decision already made and settled deep. Zorhan came and stood beside her. He didn't ask her to stay back, didn't offer protection she hadn't requested. Just stood beside her and looked at what they were both facing. You don't have to go in, he said. I know. But you are. Mira is in there because of me, because of what I carry. She pressed her hand against the charter through her jacket. I am not asking other people to clean up something that began in my family. He was quiet for a moment. Then, stay with Davin. Do exactly what he tells you. Zorhan. She turned to face him. In the dark, with the city at their backs and the waterfront ahead, he looked like the most honest version of himself she had ever been allowed to see. Not the name, not the power, not the surface he showed the world. Just a man, genuinely afraid, holding himself together by an effort now visible to her. I will be careful. I know you will. Both his hands came up and held her face, gently, as though it were something he was afraid of losing. Whatever you decide after tonight. About us. About the life you want now that you know everything. I am not going to ask you to stay because of the baby, or because the charter makes leaving complicated, or because walking away would be difficult. His jaw tightened. He didn't look away. I am asking you to stay because the last 18 months, the broken parts, the distance, Every night I handled it wrong. Were still the most real thing that has ever happened to me. And I do not know how to want anything the way I want to be the person who stands beside you while you find out who you are now. The waterfront was silent around them. Sable looked at him, felt. Beneath the fury, the grief, the accumulated weight of the night. Something very simple, very clear. She had loved him before she admitted it. She had loved him through the confusion and the silence and the months of feeling unseen. She had loved him at her most devastated, and that, she understood now, was the only testimony love can offer that actually means anything, not what it feels like when everything is easy, what it cannot stop being when everything is hard. "Ask me again," she said, after. Something passed through his expression, quiet, like a question that has been carrying itself for a very long time, finally finding where it belongs. "After," he said. They went in. What happened inside was fast and controlled and nothing like anything she had imagined. Davin's people moving with the efficiency of professionals, Zorhan with his same unshakable stillness, and Sable positioned exactly where Davin placed her as the building was cleared room by room, until one door remained. Davin stopped, looked back at her. Mira is inside. Dast is with her. Sable walked forward. "Mrs. Vale, I go in first." She met Davin's eyes without wavering. "He wants me. Let him see me. It keeps Mira alive longer." Davin stepped aside. She opened the door. The room was small and harshly lit. The flat, cold white of a space designed for nothing comfortable. Mira sat against the far wall, wrists bound, face pale but alert. Her eyes found Sable the moment the door opened and filled with something that was, at once, profound relief and profound shame. Corvin Dast stood at the center. Not what the imagination builds for men like him, not imposing, not theatrical. Slight, mid-50s, a cultivated stillness about him, the practiced manner of someone who had spent decades being underestimated and had built an entire empire on top of it. He regarded Sable with the patient, possessive attention of someone who has arrived at a destination they have been working toward for a very long time. "More composed than I expected," he said, "given the circumstances." "It has been a long week." She held his gaze without effort. "Release my sister." "The charter first." She withdrew it from her jacket. His focus went to it immediately. The intensity of someone confirming that a thing they have spent 16 years pursuing is finally within reach. 16 years, she said. And here we are. Indeed. A thin smile, certain, satisfied. She glanced at Mira. "Are you hurt?" Mira shook her head. "Sable." "I know." Back to Dast. "Here is what happens now. You release my sister. Then we discuss what this document actually grants, and what it does not." He tilted his head, amused. "I know exactly what it grants. You know what my father wrote 16 years ago." Her voice stayed level. "You don't know what I have done with it since I received it. Which parties I've spoken to, which debts I've traced, which of your allies are more afraid of you holding this than of me holding it." She let that land. "You came for leverage. But leverage only works if the other person still has something to lose, and I need you to understand, without any ambiguity, that I have decided there is nothing I will not risk to end this tonight." The room went absolutely still. He searched. For the pressure point, the angle, the opening that would shift this back where he needed it. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. She had told him only the truth, every word of it. A woman with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous thing that room had ever contained. He released Mira. No ceremony, no concession. Simply, untie her. Done. Mira crossed the room on unsteady legs and Sable caught her, held her up, felt the shaking in her sister's body, felt the impossible weight of 28 years pressing against the single, irreducible fact of her sister being alive and in her arms. "I'm sorry," Mira managed, barely audible. "Sable, I am so— not here." She held her tighter. "We will talk. But not here." The door opened. Zorhan stepped through. He swept the room, Dast, Mira, Sable, and then his gaze found hers. And in it, she saw the particular relief of someone who had been privately, genuinely terrified of one specific outcome and had just watched it not happen. Dast looked between them, at the charter in Sable's hand. "This isn't over." She looked back at him. "No, but tonight is." She walked out with her sister and her husband. She did not look back. She was done looking back. 3 weeks later, Sable's daughter was born at 4:47 in the morning. She arrived, as most important things do, without warning and slightly ahead of schedule, 7 pounds, dark eyes already studying the room. There was a quality of stillness in her first moments that made everyone present go quiet, not from procedure, but from something none of them had a word for. Zorhan was there. He had not left the hospital once, which had unsettled his entire organization, and which he did not apologize for. He sat beside Sable through the long hours of labor with an unbroken, focused presence that was, she thought, somewhere between exhaustion and something she still had no name for, the most unguarded she had ever seen him. Not performance, not management, just there, without reservation. When the baby was placed in his arms, he went completely still. That held-in-place stillness she recognized now, the composure of someone processing something too large for the face to carry. This time she understood what it was. So she watched him and said nothing and let him have the moment whole. He looked up and found her watching. His expression, undone, remade, tender in a way she had never seen on him before, did something to her heart that she suspected would never fully reverse. "She has your stubbornness," he said. Sable laughed. Genuinely, unexpectedly. The laughter of someone who had not fully believed they would arrive at a moment this clean, this unmarked by everything that had tried to prevent it. The world had not tidied itself. Dast was in custody. The legal process around the charter would take months and face opposition from people with resources and fear in equal measure. Mira had given a full account, 3 days, every conversation, every instruction, every lie. Sable had not been present for it. She had read the transcript afterward, every page. At the end, she sat in silence for a long time. Then she called her sister. The conversation was short, not because there was nothing to say, there was everything to say, but because some things require more room than currently exists, more distance, more time to hold what someone did alongside who they still are. To be furious and heartbroken and still, beneath all of it, the older sister. The one who eventually shows up. That would take real time. Both of them knew it. And that honesty, refusing to make it smaller than it was, felt like the only true beginning available. On the 5th morning, Zorhan sat on the edge of her bed with the baby asleep in the bassinet beside them and said, without any preamble at all, "Ask me again." She looked at him. "What?" "You told me to ask again. After." His eyes on hers. "I'm asking." She looked at this man, at everything they had walked through, the broken months, the forged papers, the waterfront warehouse, the dark outside the staging point where he had held her face in both hands and said the most honest thing he had ever said to anyone. At the man who had carried her mother's secret since shortly after their wedding and used it for nothing except keeping her safe. "Stay," she said, without condition, without architecture. Not because of the charter, not because of her. A glance at the bassinet. "Because I want you to." He reached across and took her hand, not quickly, not with drama, deliberately, as a choice made in the ordinary morning light, with no audience and nothing to prove. "I already am," he said. And there it was, the thing that had been true longer than either of them had spoken it. Not a beginning, a continuation, a life that had survived everything thrown at it and arrived here, imperfect, real, and undeniably theirs. Outside, Karanval was waking. Gray light came through the hospital window. The baby made one small sound in her sleep. The world moved on without them, continuous and indifferent. Sable Orinwe, who is also her father's heir, her mother's long-kept secret, and the woman who had walked into a warehouse 8 months pregnant armed with nothing but the truth and the absolute refusal to be less than it required, rested her head against Zorhan's shoulder and closed her eyes. She had been invisible once, underestimated, betrayed by the one person she had never thought to question. She was none of those things anymore. And if you stayed until this moment, if you felt every heartbreak, every revelation, every impossible choice in this story, then you already understand why. Because the women who survive the hardest things are never the ones the world was watching. They are the ones it forgot to guard against. Subscribe now. The next story is already here, and it begins with a secret that makes this one look small.